Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. I got real close to the mic so you can hear that.
Sure you did.
The
You
scoff.
blew raspberries.
How's it going?
I was going to say, did you say how's it going? Yeah. Well.
I did not.
Well, my friend, as always, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth. And Walt, we are talking about the written word today. We are back to books. I read this book. I read it so fast. I read it in like 4 days to fulfill our obligations to our beloved listeners. And in a good way. Now, didn't hate it. Wasn't a sort of thought when I went into it I would literally speed read, meaning not read, just go through and look for interesting little nuggets or tidbits or stuff like that. But I actually read almost every page of this book because it was a good one. It was a unique one. It's a different sort of one. It's about a great character, and the reason we're talking about it today, Walt, is because this guy is still going strong. He's one of the best talkers, one of the most pronounced personalities in the business. Of course, I'm talking about William Regal, and we are talking about his 2005 book, Walking a Golden Mile, which is a weird name for a book.
I was about to say, do we even know what that means after reading his book?
I assume it has something to do with something in Blackpool, right? Like, I don't recall anything in the book that stood out as the name, but it means something to him, and I have to assume it's a reference to something from his younger days, right?
I don't mean to sound insensitive, but maybe it's like some phrase related to like pissing himself for a mile.
It's possible. It also could just be a Britishism. Like, there's a lot of Britishisms in this book that he doesn't try and really like translate for us, the American audience, which I appreciated, but it could be a term that has more meaning across the pond.
Yeah, or maybe it's just tongue-in-cheek in a dry British sense of humor kind of way where it's the Golden Mile. Really, it was trudge as shit when he was going through what might possibly be the worst recorded account of drug abuse and addiction and holy shit.
Like, beyond wrestling, too. Like, we've all read stories. Anyone listening to this podcast has heard a shoot interview or read a book or a podcast or whatever. Oh, my God, people taking too many muscle relaxants, too many somas, too many painkillers, like a variety, whatever you're popping. We've all heard pill stories. I can't say I found liquid GHB and would drink a bottle of it a day just to get stoned, like, just to feel a buzz. Like, that is... It stops having something to do with like the pain, and it becomes just pure addict, which is shocking. And reading it in this book is, half of reading this book, I would just mutter to myself like, God damn it, Regal! Like, why are you doing this? Like, why have you gone down this path? Because the stuff he owns up to and the stuff he talks about is just remarkable. Like, it's stuff I don't think I would have the courage to say out loud, just because of how. Reliving it, and also just the stigma of admitting that you were at that sort of low is definitely tough to talk about.
Yeah, and we should really say just clearly that this book is effectively the story of this guy overcoming what was the worst addiction I think I've ever seen or heard or read with regards to a wrestler. Or I'm not saying this is like the worst addiction story, and I don't even want to like pass judgment on that because it just sounds icky to like say like this story is worse than this. It's like all the stories are not good. It's the threshold of bad, but it's just the detailed accounting of like literally 60% of this book is like him talking about like the darkest days of his fucking life, trying to battle this and just like. He tells it in a sense of clarity of that I wouldn't expect someone who went down this road to have with regards to like recalling very specific moments and instances and what these like the liquid GHB or what was it? I can't remember the over the counter Hisnol or
Renutrients. I think.
Yeah, like whatever the hell that thing is. What like that did to his psyche and him trapped in a bedroom for hours on end, for days on end, and just writing gibberish in a notebook. It's just like it's really daunting and very just it's I don't know chaos.
It
in
is.
words.
It's very internal, self-contained chaos. It's not like you said. We don't need to rank the addict stories, and it's not a lot of salacious stories either. It's not I did this horrible thing in exchange for drugs. It's basically I found the easiest path to drugs I could, usually literally buying them at the natural food store, the GNC, and then I lay in bed and did the drugs for hours, for days. Those are the stories, and that's the part that I think was so wild to me is he just owns up to that part of it, like the monotony of the dark and scary monotony of his addiction was not I was out doing all this crazy stuff. It was I just wanted to be stoned and high in my bed all the time. And there's something that's very sad about that too in its own way, and in a way that these stories do not typically go. And I thought that took a lot of guts to talk about because, like you said, and there's a clear break from reality at a certain point, a writing and notebook sort of insanity that he goes into, but it is all just his own personal struggles. And he doesn't sugarcoat it, and he doesn't even linger on it too much. He just lays it out real flat and real straight and says, "Here you go. This is what can happen if you fall down this hole and can't find your way out yourself."
Yeah, I don't know why it was so shocking to me. I guess because I knew that he had addiction issues at some point, but I guess I didn't know anything because I just assumed it was the same kind of situation that most wrestlers have struggled with or gone through. And I don't remember there being any crazy stories related to it. And I think that's more or less what you're saying is it wasn't even there's times where it's so uninteresting and it just was just really sad. But I mean, the big highlights with Regal going into this that I knew of is that he's British. That he
we did all know that. I think.
That he was a WCW character heel, and then and this is all my perspective. I'm sure other people knew more, and I'm just a mark, whatever. But he switched to WWE and did the man's gimmick, and then kind of just fell off the face of the planet. Did the Pillman tribute show that everybody seemed to remember that he was this brilliant wrestler, and then had this weird commissioner run in WWE for a few years, and it's and then it's just NXT. That's my perspective on this guy, and so reading it was actually interesting to learn about oh shit, there's this whole other side to this guy's story that I had no idea.
Yeah, I think Regal is. I mean, we haven't talked about Regal on the show, but again, I made reference at the top that he's this pervasive presence, and I think that's the way you described him is the way most people think of him in this weird, always around capacity. There are not a ton of Regal moments, there are not a ton of Regal matches that everybody remembers, but for the last 30 years, if you've watched wrestling, Steven Regal / William Regal was always there, he was, for most of that time, he was around in the mid-card, on TV, talking, being entertaining, being somewhat beloved, if not very beloved, for his usually heelish tendencies, his Britishness, they're leaning into that sort of character. There was always something about him that was very enticing, but he just never popped in that way, and so I think a lot of people in reading this book probably have the same viewpoint that you did. I certainly did as well, that fill in the gaps, what was this guy doing, what was his deal, and I certainly went into it hoping for more wrestling nuggets, always on board for a little WCW dysfunction, or even WCW heights. In the time when he was there in the darker periods, and he was there for the upswing. He was around for a lot of stuff. Instead, we get, the more personal stories, which is also very, very good. But either way, I just didn't know a ton about William Regal. And I think that's one of his allures. And, one of the reasons we all still care about him is he has, I don't want to say mystery because he's not a mysterious guy, but I just think he's always seemed very happy for his lot in life, for his lot in wrestling. He never felt like someone who was striving to be more than he was. He accepted where he was and he was really good at it and he did his job all the time. And I think this book reinforces that as well. Apart from the parts when his life fell, ended for a brief period, not literally, but where he paused existence for a while to recover, he's always just been this wonderful wrestling guy who's around and who we enjoy, and then maybe just sort of we forget about him when he's not staring us right in the face.
Yeah, I mean, and he says this in the book too. Like admittedly, he's like, I feel like I've just been playing the same heel British character my entire career, and then it went from like a dastardly, cheating, like a hoity-toity, highbrow British, like part of the British monarchy, kind of
an aristocrat.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably a better way to phrase it. To like the commissioner, who also acts exactly the same. It's like,
but instead uses the Britishness to like impose objectiveness and fairness. You know, like even more so than like he became more of like a classic original, upstanding gentleman as opposed to an aristocrat, where he was there to sort of keep tabs on everything and make sure everything works and is fair. Like it's a very slight pivot, but obviously a very successful one for the last decade or so of William Regal.
Right, and he also. I mean, that's from a character perspective. From a wrestler perspective, I feel like he represents this old school British. I mean, I guess it's British strong style, but just that British form of that, like, nowadays Zack Sabre Jr. and Ospreay, and just like there's a new wave of British talent that has emerged that is a little different, but like he kind of represents like the old guard mentality that I mean if you turn on AEW this week, you'll probably see him and a bunch of people that are also identify with that kind of style of like beat the shit out of you kind of wrestling. But so that's kind of like him in a nutshell. I mean, I don't want to take 300 pages of this guy's life story from 2005 and condense it, but like from an on-screen perspective, that's kind of his thing, and that's kind of been his thing forever.
Yeah, and like we said, very successful at it too. Just very didn't evolve necessarily. Didn't really change. The one notable change that we all remember is the man's man gimmick, and that's just because this book certainly adds color to that story too. Because I would say most of us assumed. That was the Regal comes over. He gets, it's the Attitude Era. Like they're not just gonna let him be Steven Regal in a little bit of a robe and like a little paunchy and like doing sleeper holds. So like Vince Russo cooks up some bullshit. It's the man's man. It sucks. And then they repackage him as again basically Steven Regal, but now William. And then it's all off to the races. But when you read this book, you realize how the timelines really worked out, and how desperate he was, how at the end of his rope he was, how fucked up he was at that point, just like could barely function and just needed the job and the contract and to stay alive, and so was happy to get anything from Vince, Russo or McMahon, and it just adds a lot of weight to that story. Like you get a sense that if Regal had been fully upright and recovered at that point, he would have said fuck right off with this man's man shit. Like this is terrible. Like because he's obviously not afraid to speak his mind to power or to whoever. Like he seems like that kind of guy. But at the point where he was at, he was not in a position to argue or say no or make recommendations otherwise. I think he just was like, yes sir, whatever you say. If as long as I get a check and I and you keep me alive, I will show up and do this horrible gimmick for you.
Right. I mean, it was like the man's man gimmick lasted all of 5 seconds.
But in our hearts it has lasted forever. So.
Yeah, I'll never forget the man's man. I thought it lasted much longer than like it really did, I guess, because
I remember the vignettes. The vignettes were definitely a thing. There might have only been a few weeks of them, but that definitely sticks in my head. The chopping wood, and obviously it becomes the Titantron as well for him. But I think that has given it that's why it stood the test of time. And the theme song, of course, is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I just like thought that run was more than like 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't.
Well, I remember there's always been talk too that, and we're getting ahead of the Regal story, but there was always talk that he was gonna face Austin too. Do you remember that? Like the point was to bring him in as the next heel to potentially face Austin, which also makes sense when you read this book because him and Austin got along really well.
Yeah, right there. I mean, I think that's kind of. Ultimately, I feel like this book is like a great. I don't want to say this callously, but it's a great PR for WWE because like all these guys spoke up for this guy like Austin, Foley, JR, all these guys are like, we got to bring in Regal. He's like, and Triple H too. We forgot the Triple H.
Oh, of course.
We're like really tight, and I never really. I guess it makes sense why he was part of Regal was a big part of NXT because of that shared history. But like, all these guys vouched for him, and then he failed all of them, and Vince still continued to like put him in rehab and make him work through all of his like problems and stuff. But like, that they put up with a lot of stuff, and I think a large majority of that is the fact that like the biggest star they had, Austin, was like, yeah, Regal's legit. Bring him in. I'll work with him. Like I would want nothing else than to work with this guy. And like, so I'm sure a lot of like these ideas and these repackaging and these attempts to bring him in, even despite all of this stuff going on, it's like Austin's vouching for you. So you're going to try and make it work as best as possible. And then when it wasn't, they still were trying to like do right by this guy, which, I don't know if everybody gets that kind of treatment. I don't know if everybody gets that kind of like help. So it's like having Austin in his corner was like, I mean, in some ways probably saved his damn life.
Yeah, you're very right. Like this is a very, I mean, we've heard these stories before, and obviously there's a chicken and the egg element to these stories where it's like wrestling is a vicious, or certainly, especially 30 years ago, 25 years ago, was a vicious business, and it would chew people up and spit them out, and then Vince would take care of you often after you were chewed up and spit out, and a lot of times you'd come out the other ends, a lot of times you wouldn't, and there was always a question of, it's nice of Vince to do that, but you could also have a less vigorous schedule, give people time off, give them health care, so they don't need to get desperate care at the end of their run. They can have regular care throughout to keep them functional. Like that's obviously the big question with all of that is it's nice, but is there a preemptive way to do it? But beyond that, that's a question that is not for another time, but is not the point of this, which is Vince did show up, and he showed up for a guy who he really didn't know at all, and had not been a part of the company, had not, it wasn't like a Taker or an Austin or a Michaels even, who'd been there and helped him survive the down periods to have the upswing. Like, of course he's going to take care of those guys. Like, we all understand why he took care of Michaels for so long. Regal, he didn't owe anything to. Regal was a new guy who just signed a contract, Like, it is very impressive what Vince did for him. And I have to imagine what you're saying is accurate, that hearing from his trusted lieutenants and his biggest stars that this is a good guy, this guy's worth holding on to, this guy's worth keeping alive. Like maybe they recognize also this guy is like really in a bad place. Like we cannot turn our back on him right now, because if we do, the consequences will be dire.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, I mean, look, I don't know if that's accurate, just so we're clear. That was complete speculative, that the motivation behind getting this guy help. This guy's falling asleep in Vince's office the first time they had a meeting together.
Vince has fired people for like similarly stupid things too.
Yeah, right.
Vince is a man who does not like certain, not even disrespect, but like he has his eccentricities, and so I could see him being like, "Why are you sleeping in my office? Like, get out of here!" But he didn't do that.
Right. I mean, the term "sold a bill of goods" couldn't apply more than the Steven Regal's about to be signed to your billion-dollar company, and he's falling asleep from all the drugs he's taking, and everybody's telling you that you need to hire him.
He's also like 280 pounds, and you're like, well, he's pretty fat now, and he was never really in shape anyway, so
right.
There were a lot of reasons to potentially say no, and again, to their credit, they did not do that. They kept him around.
All for a guy who had never really sniffed higher than the mid-card before. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess Vince really valued the arrogant British character that much, but
Regal definitely has the vibe. Like, one thing I always liked about him, and I think comes through in this book, there's some quotes. He has an opinion about training. He has an opinion about coming up in wrestling. Like, he's a very hard-nosed guy. Like, he's not. Yeah. He makes a point to say, I mean, when you're coming up, you really got to lay those holes in. You got to hurt people a little bit, but not to punish them or to haze them. Like, he tells stories his own about being literally hazed. He doesn't like bullies. He makes all that very clear too. But he also thinks you need to earn your way into the business. You need to feel some pain. You need to like really brace yourself for what you're getting into long term. You know, like there's a tough love element and there's a sort of earn your keep element that I really like in Regal because it's realistic and it's not cruel. You know, like it is honest, but it's not taking advantage of newcomers and running them out of town. Like I think it's a little survival of the fittest, and it's a little like this is a difficult world to be in, and we need to make sure that you're ready for that world on our end so that you can just show up and do your job every day and not ever be surprised at what you're getting yourself into.
I mean, he's blue collar with
he's a real man's
P.
man.
Yeah, but I think you learn about his dad and the upbringing and how that guy operated. It's like he just applied this blue collar mentality to entertainment, the most physical, unforgiving form of entertainment, outside of maybe Jackass. But even those guys seem better off in most cases. But yeah, I think that's why everybody respects the shit out of this guy too. I mean, like even in 2022, where people like still talk about this guy like he's this like incredible mind for the business and like the work, like the original worker's worker in many ways. And it's like, I think a lot of what you're saying kind of resonates with like why this guy, the way we talked about him for the first 20 minutes of this podcast, you wouldn't think that A, we respect this guy, and B, that he's worth talking about. And we were excited to talk about Regal because, and I guess we also hope people are excited to listen about him and his book because like when AEW brought him out, people were going nuts for him.
Oh yeah, and as we said, he's really just been NXT commissioner for a decade. Like he has not. It's not exactly the most popping of roles, It's not exactly the biggest spotlight in the world, but then again, for the AEW audience, what could be more horny inducing than NXT commissioner? that is probably the hottest thing any of them have ever considered in terms of their ideal wrestling character is like, oh man, he runs NXT. But yeah, I mean, he's the kind of guy where you wouldn't think that we'd all care this much, and he's the kind of guy we're surprised that the people who like him in the business like him so much because he just one thing I think about him is I really think there's a value in a wrestler who knows his place on the card and embraces it and works really hard despite the fact that he might never be a main eventer. Like you always hear about guys who want to be main eventers real bad but don't put the time in to really earn their stripes and figure out the business enough to really get it. And then you hear about guys who are so complacent about being middle of the card and they're happy to get their big paychecks and coast and have the same matches and the same angles and never go anywhere. Like Regal strikes me as a really interesting mix of those two. Like I'm sure he'd love to be the champion and would have loved to hold a higher belt and get more money and all that stuff, but he always seemed like, okay, if I'm the TV champ, I'm just gonna work my ass off and be the best goddamn TV champ there is. And like there was never really like a roadmap, I don't think, for him either. It was just like, I'm gonna do this really well and whatever happens next is gonna happen, And I think there's a put your head down, bust your ass mentality that is respectable and commendable and, like you said, very, very blue collary that I'm sure everybody gravitated to.
It's the TV title, aka the
Kiss of Death.
The Kiss of Death, yeah.
Do you remember the TV title rules he described as being the actual TV title rules? Like, I don't doubt his memory of it, but I don't recall the TV title happening the way he described it.
I trust his
over like 9-year-old us
fact checking versus the guy who fucking had the title versus a guy kids like us who maybe watch Saturday Night Main Event or not or is that what it's called?
WCW Saturday Night. It was
WCW Saturday Night. Yeah. I, my stupid idiot 10-year-old self was like, yeah, this is a waste of my fucking time. So yeah,
Regal was probably in the. We probably didn't make it to 750 on a lot of those Saturday nights where it was Regal versus Prince Iake or Regal versus Rick Martel in the main event. With his 15-minute time limit.
I was out in Seg 1 on that. Yeah. Hey, it's wrestling, but there's got to be something better on.
You're like, oh god, it's Buff Bagwell versus a jobber, and then there's 10 more of these until the main event.
Yeah, which is also a jobber. But I will say this though, like Regal does have a lot of the makings for a guy who could have had a break, though. I mean, I've already respected the shit out of this guy, and he was around long enough to, like, outside of the drug abuse has really derailed his career, and like just a few really unfortunate things. Like you said, this guy might have been programmed with Austin. Who knows what that would have like resulted in? Or there was this one moment where in his second WWE run, well, I guess it was technically his first because the first one didn't really count, where he's gonna wrestle and start a program with Kurt Angle, and like that could have put his ass in the main event. And then he tears his bicep, and then that goes away. It's like, this guy was around long enough and was a name where, like, especially around the time when he came back and was doing his commissioner stuff, and then he like teamed with Eugene and all that. It's like during that time, like WWE was really doing a whole like, oh, you've been around long enough, like you got your due now, like, he could have easily been one of those guys. He just had so many bad breaks that just completely derailed any momentum the guy had. And that started well back in his WCW days in certain instances. So it's like, I just feel like he was around long enough to be able to, like, he could have easily maybe been the main event. Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I love the character he sort of became. I think he was born to be a commissioner type. It just suits him so well for all the reasons we've already described, and like that's why we all remember him so fondly. Is he was so good at that. I don't know if there was ever. I find it hard to imagine him in the Attitude Era 99 2000 main event. Like, I mean, there was room. Like, I mean, they had like 6 or 7 great guys back then, and he could have worked with a bunch of them. Like, it's not impossible, but I don't know. Like, I just don't know if he's that. He to me, he always fit in so much better as in that 90s era WCW where they had so much TV time and they had so many workers to sort of fill the gaps in between Hogan doing whatever the fuck Hogan was doing and Flair, I guess, and eventually Piper and Sting. Like, they had so many they were just awash in some of the best workers you're ever going to see, and he just fit that little thing so well. Like, they had a lot of, I don't want to say diversity because I don't think it was actually diverse, but they had a lot of like different types of teams and wrestlers then too. They had the Luchadors, obviously. I think about Harlem Heat, I think about the Blue Bloods, I think about the Steiner brothers, the Nessie Brothers. Like, they had a lot of teams that had a distinct visual quality to them, a distinct wrestling quality to them, and I think he just fit that era so well. It's just they had a little bit of something for everybody, and I think hoity-toity British guy is just perfect in that type of world. I don't know where that fits into the Attitude Era. I just don't know. I don't know what shifts we would have seen to his character had he really gotten a chance to have that main event push. Maybe it would have worked. He's talented enough for it to work. I just find it hard to see in my mind's eye.
He's quintessential mid-90s WCW.
Yeah,
I will not argue that. I'm just saying, like, the guy could work and was well respected, and he was a character that Vince could really sink his teeth into, which was British guy. Arrogant British guy.
He did. So, I mean, later in the book, he talks about his run with Tajiri, and as you said, his run with Eugene. And like one thing about him, again, I'm sure they loved it too, is he just made all those things work, and he never complained. Like, he was like, it was great to be with Tajiri. It was great to be with Eugene. Like, he has obviously it's a WWE sponsored book, so I don't expect him to shit all over these ideas. But from what I've seen of those moments, I agree. I feel that. I feel that William Regal showed up and was like, I'm going to make this Tajiri segment the best thing it could possibly be. And then it was pretty good. And he was always good in those fish out of water, weird odd couple teams. Like, he was one of those guys who made all those things work without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who else would have been better in that role, to be perfectly honest.
I can just picture him right now, like Tajiri, like, in his broken English, and Regal being like, I don't understand you. Like, just this. It's just so perfect. You know what I mean. I can't do an impression of a dismayed British man in audio format. Ask you to do that, but I will say, well, the one thing about Regal that I think is interesting, and we like to, when we talk about these guys, usually in these one-off moments, we like to revisit their best matches or their best moments. And I think I touched upon this the half hour ago, but there isn't really a Regal moment or a Regal match, you know? Like, and he says in the book he wasn't really built for TV matches. He was built for house show matches, 15, 20 minutes. Like, he liked doing those. He felt like it better suited his talents. He was not a great 8-minute match guy. And even beyond that, I don't remember a lot of real William Regal moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that was where he stood out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, well, I mean, it's obvious to us because we know about it very well. But his match against Goldberg is
Yes.
the one that really comes to mind. Like, but I couldn't. Also, just reading the Moxley book, it sounds like this program Moxley in FCW was like really profound, but I never actually saw that, so can't really say. Can't really say that was my favorite. It was just one that I heard about and was talked about fondly. But I don't know. Is there anything else that sticks out in your mind? Any Saturday night?
Not that I can recall. You know, the Goldberg thing. I'm glad he addresses that. Like you said, that's the one I think we all recall. And you know, it's in line with I would say other stories we've heard about Bill Goldberg. Like, Bill Goldberg, kind of a piece of shit, kind of a, you know, smile in your face and then say a mean word to you behind the scenes or write a mean word about you in his book. Like, that sounds like Goldberg to a T. And like, given all the other people who vouch for Regal, I strongly err on the side of Regal tried to have a match with this stiff, and the stiff got, you know, the lights were too bright and he freaked out. Like, that sounds like what actually happened.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just surprising that Regal was such a mess from a drug addiction perspective back then. But it sounds like even if he wasn't, that match was never going to go well.
It seems like a contrast in styles, to say the least. You know, I don't think those two really were born to go toe to toe.
No, and you know, of course, in the great era of tell-all books, which I think this book came out during the height of that. You know, he mentioned that Goldberg talked shit about him in the book, but he's always been nice to his face. It's like, and then so now Regal's in his book saying, I read that Goldberg talked shit about me, but he's always nice to my face. And now I'm going to talk shit about him. It's like,
yeah,
God.
book on book pissing matches, definitely. We've seen a few of those in our day, haven't we?
One too many. But with regards to this book coming out when it did,
yeah, I was gonna mention that as well.
Because I think we more or less put a bow on the favorite Regal matches a segment here.
Yeah, the shortest one we've ever done, I think.
Yeah. You know, obviously this guy had a lot more career after 2005. And I think that, you know, I understand why this book came out when it did with regards to just like the arc of his addiction, and you know, that's kind of really the point of this story, because like even his WWE stuff he kind of just glosses over a lot towards the end. So like in typical fashion, I'm usually like, well, you know, he could have waited a little bit longer, but after you read this, you're like, maybe this guy didn't think he had much longer.
Yeah.
After all these, like his heart scare and all that.
He probably didn't think he was going to be in WWE until 2021. You know, I bet that did not cross his mind at that point.
No, definitely not. But I will say though, and I'll recommend everybody go do this, is listen to his recent Talk Is Jericho interview. Mm-hmm. And the reason
which I did not do, despite you recommending it as potential supplemental materials.
Okay, that just means I get to talk more. But what I'll say though is like, he tells a lot of stories about his health. He had a few very recent health scares. This guy is like a medical marvel because you know, if you read this book in 2005 and he's talking about, I never really slept well and I had all these issues and I had all this pain, and obviously you know where that leads to. But you find out recently in this interview that like, oh, actually in 1993 I had a match with Ricky Steamboat and I did a German and I broke my neck. And it was undiagnosed for 30 years.
Jesus.
And so that's why he's never been able to sleep, which is what kind of like led him to drug use, which kind of recontextualizes a lot of what he went through. It's like this guy had a broken neck for 30 years. And then I can't do it justice. This is his story to tell, but he goes into this like crazy whole story about just like having to drain the spinal fluid and because of all his neck isn't bone anymore. It's kind of just like this like powdery mush, this like goop.
Jesus.
And he tells a story about like staying up for 8 straight days and like having to drain the spinal fluid coming out of his like neck from 30 years of having a broken neck. And it's crazy. Like this guy is, and that's just one of like 20 different stories he tells with regards to his body and like what he's gone through. So when you hear that about all these like stories of him managing pain and dealing with pain, intense pain like this, it's like no wonder why this guy got fucking addicted to like pills. It's like this guy's body sounds like a wreck.
Yeah, that's really sad too, because he doesn't make excuses in the book for his addiction. You know, he doesn't. He didn't know, obviously, at the time that was like you said. He says he can't sleep. He says, you know, he was fighting through some stuff, and I'm sure the aches and pains, but he doesn't ever say like I did this. He doesn't talk about like gateway drugs a ton. Like he certainly says certain ones are worse than others. He makes it clear when he made the really, really bad wrong turns, but it's not a woe is me type book. You know, it's a this is a terrifying thing, and like the drugs are bad. Stay away from them. Don't do them. Like whatever short-term benefits there are long-term repercussions that will ruin your life. Like so, but it is depressing now to hear that there was a medical reason behind it, even if he didn't make excuses and didn't think of it that way, like that he had a horrific injury that never was realized, and that's what led to him. Wow, like what a sacrifice these guys make, you know? Like I know they love the work, but what a hell to put yourself through to come out the other end, and it doesn't go away anytime soon. Like again, it sounds like he's had a lifetime of these issues, so it's they compound over time, they don't go away, you find out new ones. Like it just sounds like the most exhausting thing.
Yeah, and these are stories he tells about his body and the ailments that his body is like working around for 3 decades. That doesn't include the stories that he told in the book where he's like tearing all of his biceps and all of his pecs, and he stepped in the ring with Benoit every time he like tore a meniscus. And then the story at the end of his book, they're talking about it. They had to reset his heart because it wasn't draining the right way, and he gained like 30 pounds of inflammation in his legs. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, this is nuts. Like this is like not how a body should function.
No, it's not.
So
and like you said, it's not something that you should live through. You know, we're so happy he did, but typically you think one of these things would be the death of him, but yet, as you noted, you put AEW on Wednesday nights. He's out there with Danielson and Moxley and Wheeler Yuta now doing his thing. Like one thing I loved in the book that he references, and it's sort of a throwaway moment. It's not a huge deal, but he talks about being told that when you get to America, you have to talk like that. It's just a big part of the job. It's not a big deal working house shows in Britain and Blackpool, but when you get to America, they're going to give you a microphone. And like he just mentions, like he spends a lot of time practicing, like reading things, listening to things, rehearsing, looking in the mirror. Obviously doing segments with Tony Schiavone, you know, off to the side, like recording things, like both practicing quietly at home and also like getting as many realistic reps he can out in the world. And like I think that's why he has survived this long. Like I don't think it was a talent he had from moment one, but you can tell he leaned into the persona we talked about so much. He adopted that, he embraced that, and he found a way to be comedic, to be silly, to be weird, to be like a clown sometimes, to make faces, like all these things we love him now. His turns of phrase, his faces, like these are the byproducts of decades of work. You know, like this guy realized his limitations and set out to conquer them, and in terms of the business, and that's cool as shit. Like it's not hard. It's hard to do. It's not easy to get good at those things. Like there's some natural talent, but it sounds like there was just a lot of effort on his part, and it's paying off because he's gainfully employed for, you know, probably as long as he wants it, as long as he makes it alive. So it's great. He deserves it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's not an accident that everybody respects the shit out of this guy, and you know, you get a strong sense of that reading his book. He does this weird thing in the book where he kind of justifies, like, no, it's not me, Darren Matthews, kissing Vince McMahon's ass. It's a character. I'm like, yeah, I got it, man. Yeah, thanks for like explaining that to me.
I took that as, partly, there was a little bit of the wrestler explaining to the readers what the world is. I remember there was one section where he's like, wrestling is fake, but it's not fake. And it's like, okay, we don't really, God, are we doing this again? Like, please, no.
Yeah,
but
for
I
Christ's
took that
sake.
as like, he just was never the kind of person who would say no to that sort of thing. Because he was like,
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. Like, if on TV I kiss a guy's ass, like, in TV, people do, and acting roles, people do weird shit all the time. It doesn't mean that's who they are. It means they're playing a character. Like, it was a very literal way to describe it, but I think it was just like, why would I turn down a acting role at my job? Like, that's what they pay me to do. I will go out and act for 5 minutes and they'll give me a paycheck, and like that's what I'm here for. Like, I just think it was a very honest, refreshing perspective on what's like in a probably a very, especially back in those days, a very macho locker room, a very like, fuck Vince, I'm not doing this gay stuff in that particular scenario. I'm not kissing a guy's butt. That's weird. And like, I'm sure Regal's like, I don't care. Why would I care?
Right. I mean, I think if he said it the way you just said it there, then we're good. But to explain to me that a character does the thing but is not reflected of the artist, it's like, all right.
Not to besmirch co-author Neil Chandler, whoever that is, but it would not surprise me if some of those sections were massaged by one Neil Chandler to be very like on the nose and like explanatory in a way that because the rest of the book is really not that, like it does not get in the weeds with that sort of stuff. He just sort of, it feels very breezy and very like William Regal talking to a tape recorder. Someone transcribes it and cleans it up a little bit, and that's the book.
Yeah, but to get that insight, quote unquote insight, on page 280, like I'm like, dude, we're wrapping up your WWE career as of 2005. Like, why are you explaining this to me?
Yeah, we just did the You Addict part and the horrible lives, and now we're doing WWE bullet points. We don't need to get in the weeds on the ins and outs of performance.
Right? Yeah. I can separate art and reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a wrestling fan, for Christ's sake. Yes. I understand how to separate these conflicting thoughts. Thank you.
One thing I will say, Walt, as we are wrapping up ourselves here, is there's one chunk of the book that I found very interesting. I suspect this piqued your attention as well. There's a little part, real quick, when he talks about getting back into the swing of things, getting back into wrestling post, overcoming his addictions. And he says he tried to go to ECW. He says he tried to give Paul Heyman a call. He tried to come in. I imagine it was during the shaky 99 2000 ECW days where it was a sinking ship and they were trying to make new stars and they just weren't able to do it fast enough or retain the guys they had. But Regal in ECW, in like a functioning ECW, would have been incredible. Like just a Heyman taking that character and doing something with it and playing off what he had. I don't even know what he would have done, but I wish we could have seen a little bit of that, because I feel like maybe it wouldn't have been Austin level good, but I think it would have been in that ballpark.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the guy definitely, he was more than just what was presented in many ways. And yeah, I'm sure Heyman would have tapped into his potential a lot more than.
I bet he becomes like a real shoot-fighting British guy. It's like you all thought he was this foppish lord, but in reality, he will beat the shit out of you with like a roll of quarters in his hand and make you bleed. Like I feel like they would have prided in something cool in that area.
Yeah, and then ECW 1999 would have been Jerry Lynn and RVD and William
and Spike Dudley
and everybody else. Instead, it was just RVD and Jerry Lynn
having 8 million matches against each other.
Yeah, I mean, maybe my timetable's off there, but
no, I think at least Jerry Lynn and Just Incredible for sure. So
I think of late ECW, it's strictly like, oh yeah, like RVD and Jerry Lynn had a bunch of bangers, and then there's just like a bunch of other shit.
Yeah, and then Steve Corino was off to the side.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's good. You're richer for not having remembered that. So.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's Walking a Golden Mile. Walt, would you say this is a treat? What's your final take on this one?
Well, if it's treat versus not treat, I would say treat.
Yeah. I mean, if you got to flip a coin, it comes out on the positive, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna scream at people to go run and read a Steven Regal book.
Read the 17-year-old Steven Regal
from 2005. But if you do happen to read this, you should. It's worth reading.
I will say, if you go on Amazon and you wish to purchase it, do not buy it on hardcover or paperback, because apparently it was a very rare book. The hardcover is $240 and the paperback is $50. The Kindle is $3. So I would strongly recommend you not try to get a tangible hard copy of this book. I don't think it would be worth the investment.
Maybe that has something to do with the Golden Mile, you know? I don't know. I'm not even sure how that would be relevant to books, but
I will say $3 is about the right price for the Regal book, though, and if I think you got to give it the treat if you're spending that little money on this nice little story. So,
how much was Countdown to Lockdown?
I believe 99 cents or maybe $2, so cheaper than this.
Okay, so then,
and that might still have been high in your, at least in your viewpoint.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, this was worth. From a reading value perspective and a monetary perspective, this was, a lot better than Countdown and incrementally a little bit more money.
But not nearly as much TNA, unfortunately. Really no TNA at all, which is I can't imagine reading a book without any TNA.
I know, right? What did we really learn?
Well, if you enjoyed William Regal book, again, it's out there on Kindle for a very low price, and he's appearing on AEW TV at the time of this episode. We're about to, I believe, what's the pay-per-view coming up, Walt, that we're all about to enjoy? Double or Nothing?
Yes, it is.
At the time of the recording, I'm not sure what Blackpool Combat Club will be up to, but I imagine Moxley and Danielson will be there, and Regal will be there. So if you enjoy a little Regal, he will presumably be there, looking cool with his long hair. Again, he also was the kind of guy, when he had that short haircut, it just made him look so ugly. He looks so good with the longer hair. Like that changed his whole game, I feel like.
I don't know when he made that change, but I feel like it's been so. But you see pictures in his book in 2005, I'm like, yeah, he still had the short hair.
Yeah. He looks really, I mean, he's got a unique look to him, like no doubt about that. But with the long hair, like he looks borderline handsome in a suit and all that. Like can't say the same about Snooty. Like I just picture him with that scrunchy face and the short hair, and that's not the most beautiful man I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, definitely longer locks is the way I like my Regal.
Yeah, that's right. Well, if you like this episode and you want more, you can always find our archives. They're available at awesometruth.libsyn.com. All of our episodes are there, all 120-something of them. We got many, many, many. And if you want to subscribe to get all of our new ones, you can find them everywhere podcasts are: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to Awesome Truth there, and you will get all of our new episodes. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at AwesomeTruthPod. Walt, great to talk Regal with you. Great to read another book. We're really churning through these 15-year-old memoirs by these relatively specific, very old memoirs by random assorted wrestlers. It's been our bread and butter lately.
Yeah, right. But I think we're getting into a rhythm where we can take these down a lot quicker, and
we can also do it after all these episodes. We can do whatever we want, right? There's no rules anymore.
Oh, well, that's been true for 100 episodes.
That's right. Well, for all these many episodes, we appreciate you all so much for listening. We hope you come back for more. Thank you so much, and remember, the truth will set you free.